Hi there. I'm Laura Lansrud-Lopez, and I'm honored to address the Southwestern College community and the graduating class of 2021. I have to pause for a moment with that statement. During my first year at Southwestern College, I didn't know if I would finish the program, much less imagine myself here today giving this keynote. Back then, as a student, I wondered if I had what it takes to do this work. And I'll be honest, I was initially a bit resistant to what I later came to understand is the process of transformation through education. At the time, it felt a bit disorienting. Perhaps some of you graduating today might relate to that or a similar feeling during your first few classes. I was 32 with a master's degree in forensic science and had recently left my job with the FBI in DC to move back home to Santa Fe to help my family after my father's stroke. In my case, disorienting is an understatement. It was a culture shock, and I left the program twice, and I returned twice. And each time I returned, I did so with a renewed drive and passion for art therapy and counseling, a dedication to making a difference in my community, and a greater commitment to connecting with my inner world and understanding my inner monsters. For me, transformation through education was about integrating the paradox of both and embracing the whole of my humanity in all its grace and flaws, accomplishments and mistakes, and forgiving myself for judging myself. A hard journey indeed, and one I'm still on. Ultimately, it took me 4.5 years to finish the program. But I did finish, and now so have you. This is a remarkable achievement. You've demonstrated that you have what it takes to do this work. And I'm going to let you know something. Our communities need you. The world needs you. And for everybody graduating today, I thank you for stepping up. I also want to thank Southwestern College, our faculty, staff, the board of directors, your family members, friends, and loved ones, and all who have supported you in this amazing achievement. Congratulations. I'm sad that we can't gather in person for this celebration, or share hugs and handshakes when handing you your diploma, or meet your loved ones following the ceremony. But I do hope you'll enjoy this talk and visual journey, and please know how proud of you we are at Southwestern College in Tierra Nueva. As this capstone mural says, the journey has just begun. What I'd like to do now is tell you a story. It's a story I grew up with here in Santa Fe and have told, retold, and then much later as a therapist, learned to hear something else, an untold story. Or rather, I became more keenly aware of the potential for stories to evolve and hold multiple meanings and metaphors. Some stories are a summons for us to talk about what we've been told we shouldn't talk about, or they cause discomfort when brought into conscious awareness. These untold stories can be an opening for transformation, and new stories, new possibilities emerge. As James Hollis says in his work, Necessary Fictions, therapy is a critique of stories. Sometimes our narratives address questions important in our search for origins. Sometimes they help us bear the weight of suffering better. Sometimes they help us live in harmony with the world around us. And sometimes those same stories imprison us. The story I'm going to tell you is a scary story. It's a folktale I grew up with in northern New Mexico and have borrowed here. I've borrowed the version told by my friend Chris Lucero, with his permission, of course. It's the story of La Llorona, the weeping woman. Many years ago, there was a young woman who lived in the mountains of northern New Mexico, in a small village not far from here. Everyone thought she was the most beautiful woman for miles around. Her name was Maria. She would take walks through the village and say, "Someday, I'm going to marry the most handsome man in the world. His hair will be shiny black like a raven, and he will be as strong as a stallion." And her abuelita, who loved her dearly, would say, "Caras vemos, corazón es no sabemos." People's faces we can see, but we cannot see what's in their heart. You should, fairy, find somebody with a good heart. Then one day, a handsome vaquero came into town. He could catch wild horses and tame them. He could play the guitar and sing beautifully, and he was so handsome. Maria made up her mind she would marry him. Her family warned her to find someone who would be a good and kind husband, but driven by ego and passion, she refused to listen. At first, everything was fine. They had 2 children and seemed happy. But it wasn't long until that vaquero went back to his wild ways, and he would stay gone for months at a time. And when he did come home, he would say, "Maria, I didn't come to see you. I came to see my children." After he played with the children for a few minutes, he would head back to town, gamble, and get drunk. Maria was a very proud woman, but she found herself getting jealous. She even became jealous of her children and the way her husband fawned over them. One evening, she was working outside when her husband rode up in a horse-drawn carriage. Sitting beside him was an elegant lady. She didn't know her. Maria's clothes were soiled from cooking and cleaning, and her hair was disheveled from the high desert wind. She felt ashamed of her appearance and longed for his affection. He stopped to talk to his children, but he didn't even glance at Maria. After some time, he got back in the carriage and whipped the horses on down the road. When Maria heard the sound of the whip crack, something erupted inside her. So much anger, so much jealousy, and so much pain. She grabbed her children by the arm and dragged them to the rio. And in a blinding rage, she threw them in. As she saw them being carried away, she realized what she had done. She ran along the banks of the rio, reaching out to them, calling out to them, as though she could bring them back with her wailing. But they were gone. She kept running, driven by guilt and despair, until she tripped on the root of a tree, hit her head on a rock, and was killed. They buried her on the bank of the rio in the exact same spot where she died, but she could not rest in peace. Night after night, she rises from the grave, wandering the banks of the rio, acequias and arroyos, searching for her lost children. People in the village say they hear her wailing in the night, "Mis hijos, ¿dónde están mis hijos?" My children, where are my children? No one knows her as Maria anymore. They know her as La Llorona, the weeping woman. The local people tell their kids to come home at dusk and never to play on the banks of the rio. They say La Llorona is searching for her children, and if she finds you, she will take you instead. There are many versions of this story told across Mexico and up through New Mexico. Clarissa Estes traces its origins back to the 15th century, but she thinks it might be even older than that. And one wonders how this scary folktale might have served not only as entertainment through the ages, but perhaps it has also served to bring the listener a shiver of awareness that leads to thoughtfulness, contemplation, and then perhaps action. In the words of Estes, it is an odd tale, for it continues to evolve throughout time, as though it has a big inner life of its own, like a great marching sand dune that pushes across the land, taking up what is before it, building with and upon it until the land becomes part of its own body. This story builds on the psychic issues of each generation. She goes on to tell different iterations of this ancient story, each reflecting the unique psychic issues of that generation and community. In one version, La Llorona is said to have been a translator and fell in love with the Spanish conquistador Cortez. It did not turn out well. In another, she was described as being taken advantage of by a rich developer during the land grant wars in New Mexico. Again, an unpleasant outcome. And in yet another iteration, La Llorona haunts a small community and lures children into a nearby river that has been poisoned from industrial pollution upstream. In most versions of this story, she is a horrifying character, a crazy woman, unable or unwilling to rest in peace. Maria begins with hope and promise, but La Llorona is broken, maligned, and despised by society. No longer a woman, but a horrifying shell of her human self. As a kid, this story terrified me. I grew up near the Santa Fe River, which runs with melted snow in the spring from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And I was very careful to avoid this river at dusk. It also served as a warning to stay away from arroyos that might have flash floods or coyotes or other dangers. That was the meaning of La Llorona that held for me until I became a therapist and began to hear many stories of grief, guilt, disappointment, regret, mistakes, fits of anger, or accidents that can't be repaired or taken back. Like Maria running along the riverbank, some of my clients have driven themselves into physical, spiritual, and mental exhaustion with the vain effort to embrace again what has been lost. Some of them might even see death as a place to rest from the running, the reaching out, and the weeping. And, as sometimes accompanies the experience of a traumatic event, there's the torturous, isolating nature of blaming oneself, even if one is not responsible for what happened. As with La Llorona, I noticed some of these stories held similar underlying themes. I'll call them core beliefs of being broken or beyond help, unlovable, or unworthy of joy, of being, in one's own eyes or the eyes of others, a monster. I tell the story of La Llorona also because it holds deep resonance for me as a mother who experienced the death of a child. I have struggled with the tsunami of tears and self-blame that threatened to drown me and transform me into the weeping woman. I didn't drown, thanks to many people who reached out and held me above water, and for that, I am extremely lucky. But I did, over the years, develop an ability to be present with my own grief, the grief of others who are suffering, and became intimately acquainted with how self-blame can become all-consuming. I also developed a greater sensitivity to the power our narratives have over us and our experience of reality. For me, the story of La Llorona is now a cautionary tale, not about the dangers of children playing on the banks of the Rio or the arroyos in the high desert, but is rather a cautionary tale, one that sends shivers up my spine about the dangers of being engulfed by a single story in which we play the villain or the victim. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of losing ourselves to despair, where even death or self-punishment or numbing out in myriad possible ways does not bring peace. James Hollis describes it this way: We are creatures who need to understand at any cost, and so we story our experiences. And those stories, provisional, localized, and often created at an early stage in our history, become defining narratives. The disarray of our histories, nevertheless, can be a powerful guide to the stories to which we have been in service for many years. He goes on, therapy can be understood as the critical analysis of our operative stories. Until these narrative interpretations can be smoked out, we remain their captive. So, how do we smoke them out? How do we liberate ourselves and our clients from the stories that imprison us, from the guilt or regret or shame that binds us to the horrors of our pain? When we're sitting with a client who has lost a child or a parent or another loved one, how do we hear beyond the scary story, the story that might send a shiver of fear or disgust or judgment, and deeply listen for the untold story? The story that might bring a light of new awareness or a shift in perspective that will crack open the path for transformation and growth. At the risk of disappointing you, I'll come clean now and admit that I don't have the answer. And I don't have some magical key to unlock the mystery. In fact, most of my professional career can be summed up by saying, I've been adept at staying just one step behind my next learning curve. I can look at this with frustration and think, when will I finally know everything I need to know? Or I can look at it with inspiration and think, what an invigorating adventure it is to keep learning new things about the limitless depths of my soul and the beautiful complexities of our world. I prefer the latter, and I invite you to join me there. And as I advise my students and supervisees, stay curious. And be wary of coming to a premature conclusion. In fact, try to avoid conclusions at all, when possible. Or as a dear friend of mine once offered, good questions lead to better questions, not answers. When I was invited to give this keynote, I was conflicted. On one hand, it's a tremendous honor, and I would love nothing more than to celebrate this accomplishment with you. And on the other hand, who am I to presume to offer words of guidance at such an important occasion? I don't know enough yet. And then I remember how familiar this story is for me too. The story that if I just knew a little bit more, or had a little more training, or another degree, then I'll be qualified to do the thing. I laugh because I've learned to find humor in my quirks and accept my own insecurities. My point is that it's okay to feel uncertain when confronted with a new experience, or grapple with the lack of confidence when taking on a new challenge. Those emotions aren't an accurate reflection of your ability. Instead, it's a sign of your courage in the face of growth. In fact, I am confident, we at Southwestern are all confident that you are ready for this next new step into the profession and the world of counseling and art therapy. But I don't want to leave you thinking that all I have to offer is a local folktale and my faith in you, although I do have faith in you. So I did some research and I asked a trusted mentor for guidance, and the advice was, just get her done. Stand up, speak what you know to be true. That's the only thing life asks of any of us. So simple, and yet somehow paradoxically difficult at times. So here I am with something I do know. While many of us come to the field of counseling and art therapy because we want to be of service, and there is no doubt we care about our communities, the best preparation for what lies ahead is to hold in equal value these two questions. How can I be of service? and what in me needs healing. And then listen deeply. As Carl Jung advises, we can take another only so far as we have journeyed ourselves. If our wounds remain unhealed, there is grave potential for harm to our clients and to us. The shadow side of the wounded healer archetype can be expressed in many ways. For example, it might be unconscious and lead us to do things we can't explain and don't understand. Or it might show up as a projection onto others, finding flaws and making accusations, bringing in judgment. Or it could look like overconfidence and certainty, because these positions deflect the discomfort of not knowing. And in my estimation, managed care has suffered a bit of this, but that's for another conversation. Thinking back to the story of La Llorona, some people have described her as having long fingers torn to the bones from dredging the river in efforts to find the souls of those who were gone, the ghosts of her past. Because if she can save them, she will be forgiven. She will be worthy of redemption. Analogously, another shadow side of the wounded healer is to self-sacrifice, overwork, deny our needs, feel compelled to do more, work harder, and heartbreakingly put our art making and time for nourishing self-reflection and communion with our inner world last on our to-do list. I've heard more than once, I miss being a student because making art, discussion, and reflective writing were required. And now I just don't have the time or energy. The cautionary tale of my untold story of La Llorona is to remember what nourishes you, what rejuvenates your soul, what enhances your experience of life and your relationships. In other words, it warns us to pause and listen deeply to the messages from our psyche. Southwestern College has launched you on a path of rigorous self-reflection and dialogue with your inner world. And speaking for myself, the process of transformation through education wasn't always easy. It was not butterflies and rainbows, but it was an essential foundation for my ability to retell my story, to survive loss, and with time, to be fully present with others in pain without my fear, triggers, or panic taking over. Do I still make mistakes? Absolutely. And I forgive myself for judging myself for not being perfect. This ridiculous expectation of myself to be perfect is another old story and limiting story. We smoke out these old stories that imprison us when we dialogue with our inner world and question our assumptions. The more strongly we hold an opinion, or the more strongly we react to others, the more fruitful the dialogue might be. You, as graduates, have been introduced to ways to dialogue with your inner world. Art making, reflective writing, journaling, tracking your emotions, your somatic experiences, paying attention to your impulses, your dreams, your inclinations, and areas of resistance or judgments. We talk a lot about self-care at Southwestern College. Probably so much you might inwardly roll your eyes at the term now. But there's a wise reason we do this. Without a dedicated practice of connecting with your inner world, your soul or psyche, how can we possibly smoke out our old narratives, challenge them, envision new possibilities, and embrace our untold stories? Listening deeply is essential for our health and our capacity to walk beside our clients on their journey. Or in other words, if I'm a stranger to myself, How can I be in a healthy relationship with another? My advice to you as you move forward on your path as counselors and art therapists is to forgive yourself for judging yourself. Listen deeply for the untold stories, your own and those of your clients. And when in doubt, choose curiosity. And finally, think of self-care, reflective practice, and dialogue with your inner world as an essential part of your health and wellness, and perhaps an antidote to becoming La Llorona. As I learned the hard way, one of the most meaningful and redemptive endeavors we can pursue is to continue to ask of ourselves, in what way am I a vehicle for the expression of life? And then to listen deeply for the response from our psyche. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you and tell you again, congratulations.